What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Depressed Funny People. Today's episode is obviously extra special because it's not just me sitting alone in my bed, like bitching about life and all my problems. I brought someone else to do it with me and wallow in my, confusion about life and mental health. So I actually got an expert, guys. So without further ado, I just want to introduce her. Danielle, say hello to everybody
Hi,
that's listening.
everyone. And Anthony, I'm a little sad I didn't know I could do this from my bed. So next
Totally.
time we do this.
Well, I'm 3,000% like all the way in my bed right now. So yeah, I have like my furry ass pillows here. Like I'm just
Love it.
comfy. You know what's funny is that I get better acoustics in here. So that's my excuse for doing this shit in bed. But so Danielle, obviously you are here on the show. Would you mind telling my listeners why you're on the show as far as, who are you? What's your title? And let's just start there. Who the heck are
Yeah.
you?
So, like you said, my name's Danielle. I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and my focus is in health psychology, which means that I work with the intersection of mental health and medical concerns. So, people who have, diabetes, sleep problems, chronic pain, and how does that influence our mental health? Outside of work, I'm a first generation immigrant. My father came here from Haiti when he was an adolescent. So, probably one of the biggest facets of my identity, my life has been being the child of an immigrant and all that comes with that, all the pressure that comes with that.
Woo!
So, I'm bicultural, biracial, and I'm in Philly.
That's awesome. So you just got like the whole variety pack over here. You just got it all, like a little bit of everything,
Yeah.
right, on your plate. So that's always fun. Um, so I want to ask you, what do you love most about your job?
I just love learning about people. I think people are so fascinating. Being an introvert, I tend to watch and notice a lot in my daily life. So I pick up on a lot
Mm,
of things. Of course, being a psychologist, I get to talk to people all day. I get to listen to what's going on for them and try to help them take sort of the cluster of things that are happening in their life and help them weave it into something that they can understand better and that they can try to improve. So that's probably what I love the most about my job.
that's awesome. It's got to be fulfilling to be like, you know what? I just did some shit that like really helped somebody. Like,
It is. It is. It's nice to be able to see a tangible product to your work. But also, sometimes patients come and they nothing changes, and I
oof.
think that's part of the humility of being a psychologist is just realizing that you're not always the one that's going to get them over the finish line, but
Mm,
maybe you can plant a few seeds that are going to
yes.
germinate over time, and maybe 5 years later they're going to have this great breakthrough. Maybe it'll be because of you. Maybe
Wow.
remember, but planting seeds or running them over the finish line, whatever it is, I love doing it.
That's an amazing way to look at it too. It's kind of like when your mom gives you advice and you're like, "Bleh," and then your friends tell you the same thing and you're like, oh, so okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Or even as you age, in your teens, you're like, mom doesn't know what she's talking about. And then when you're in your
Mm-hmm.
20s, you're like, oh wow, yeah. She knew she
You're
knew
like,
what was happening.
oh, that's too funny. Um, what is the biggest pain point of your job, would you say? For
Within my current job, a lot of the administrative things that we have to do that's not therapy, like scheduling. But, within the context of therapy, I would say it can be difficult to hear some people's stories, just the things that they've been through. Trauma is not pleasant for a psychologist, any kind of therapist to hear. But in those moments, I'm just really thankful that I've been able to provide a safe enough place for them to share that because these are often things that people aren't sharing with anyone. So those moments, though, as painful as they can be, also for your therapist to hear those things, it reminds me just how resilient humans are.
For sure.
And I'm glad that they've made it to my office to be able to share that. But hearing trauma is hard, even for your therapist.
I was gonna say it's gotta be heavy. It's gotta be heavy. It's like watching like a lifetime movies, but like on repeat, like and not being able to ever turn the TV off.
Exactly.
Yikes. So I do want to talk about your mental health. That's actually one of the questions that I have later on. Before we dive into this, I want people to kind of get an idea of you. So really fast, we're gonna do like a 10-second icebreaker game. Um, just to get to know you a little bit. So I'm gonna ask you rapid fire a couple questions.
Okay.
We're gonna see what you say, and then we're gonna go from there. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. So this is just the pettiest question ever, but Cardi B or Nicki Minaj, who are we picking?
Oh, gosh. I,
And
I got to go with Nikki.
okay, okay, Nikki, got it.
I'm gonna go with
Uh,
Nikki.
Domino's or Papa John's?
Oh, Domino's.
Okay. Living single or friends?
Living single.
Okay. Celine Dion or Mariah Carey?
You're gonna
I
make me
know.
choose
That,
between my
that's
divas.
so rude. It was nasty. It was foul of me, but
Yes, it was nasty.
it's what
I'll
I
go with
do.
Celine. I'll go with Celine. But really Whitney. I mean.
Ooh, okay. Do you know what? Okay. I'll take it. I'll take it. I'll take it. Okay, I couldn't.
Curveball.
Curveball. I was like, oh, and I oop. Okay, just kidding. All right. Well, those are just my quick questions. I just wanted to kind of like, lighten the mood before it gets a little heavy because that's the thing about this show is the name of it's Depressed Funny People because I think there are so many people that use their humor as a mask and they use it as a way to cope with trauma. So I kind of want to mix that in because I don't want to just, throw this shit on you guys all day long, but we are going to dive into some questions that I have from myself, questions I have from listeners. Thank you guys so much for writing in with your questions. And we're going to finally sit down with a professional instead of just listening to me ramble every week. So we're gonna where I want to begin is like the biggest thing on everybody's mind right now. 2020 is just that bitch. It is that girl. It is just, we get it, right? Can we just talk for 2 seconds about the psychological state of America in 2020 and your perspective, of this as a mental health professional, the mental health state of America right now?
Yeah, I mean 2020 is putting us through it, right?
Yeah.
Testing us in so many ways. And we have uncertainty. Uncertainty is not something that most people like. We don't like uncertainty. We don't like change. And this pandemic is giving us both of those things in spades. So
Oof.
it's challenging us in all those ways. And then on top of it, our typical coping skills, which is turning to our tribe, turning to our community, we're limited in that. There's great research even that talks about how we need 7 human touches in a day to be really happy.
Oh.
And so it's funny because a good friend of mine shared this article with me, and that was just our excuse to hug each other randomly during the workday.
Oh.
But now, we can't do that. We just do the little air hug from afar.
Oh.
So this is the pandemic and the multiple pandemics that we're going through, quite frankly, in 2020 are definitely testing all of our coping skills. Even those of us who have, very, very robust coping skills, we're just getting exhausted by constantly having to be vigilant, constantly having to be watchful and remember to wear a mask and not be able to have access to our communities. So depression prevalence is actually 3 times higher during COVID
Oh,
than
wow.
back in 20 compared to 2019.
I was wondering that.
And a lot of
Wow.
it's related to financial stress, uncertainty about when this will end, job losses, things like that. So it's tough.
Oof.
This year's tough.
And you said multiple pandemics. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, so we have the obvious global pandemic with COVID-19 that
Mm-hmm.
everyone is aware of, but also, with the murder of George Floyd, I think that has brought to more people's attention the pandemic of racism that has existed in this country since its inception. And we sat at home in front of social media. Some of us watched the video. I didn't. I couldn't watch the video to watch those 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And it's interesting because without this pandemic, I question whether without the COVID pandemic, I question whether people's eyes would have been all trained on the same thing at the same time, and whether
Mm.
they all would have been open to this experience that Black Americans have been going through. And other racial groups go through similar experiences, but the pandemic of racism against Black Americans is particularly egregious.
I could not agree with you more. I couldn't watch that video either. The whole thing, I just saw like a few seconds in the photos, the screenshots, and that was more than enough for me. So I'm also blown away at the 3 times more likely people are to be depressed. I mean, it makes sense because I had never battled formal depression. I mean, anxiety, yeah, but never like just sitting in like my shit until this happened. And like you said, I really do think that we needed something to slow people down long enough to stop and examine what we were saying about this pandemic of racism, our experiences, because people were doing too much to even stop to care.
Mhm.
I feel like they
That's
had to
true.
sit their ass down for a second and be like, okay, now let's look at this. Let's look at these murders. So speaking of that, people being more likely to be depressed right now. Do you think, everyone seems to have this, we're having a lot more discussions about mental health, right? So I just wonder if you think the general perception and stigma of mental health in America is changing for the better through this, or for the worse, or is it the same?
I think it's really interesting with social media, and particularly like the millennial and Gen Z population are way more open about talking about the fact that they're going to therapy, talking about their mental health concerns. You see all these memes like, "Oh, my therapist said this," or that whole "I said this to my therapist and my therapist said no."
Yes,
You know?
I love
So
those.
I love those. They're some of my favorites. My therapist friends and I send them to each other. They're
I
like,
always
"Yep,
wondered
been
that.
there."
I wonder, do therapists look at like the therapist memes, and
Oh,
it's true.
100%,
Oh,
100%.
oh, that's nice.
So it's I think it's changing for the better in that people are being more open about their mental health struggles and just destigmatizing it, normalizing that everybody goes through some shit in life. I think that probably most people have a point in their life where they could benefit from some support from a mental health therapist. It might not be a long period, it might be postpartum depression, it might be grief, it might be a lot of anxiety around graduation or test taking or applying for something. But we can all at some point, I think, use some skills. So I think and I hope that the stigma is going down.
That is, I would have to agree as well. I feel like I'm getting less people looking at me, crazy when I say I'm going to therapy, or I'm very vocal about that even at work when I'm like I got to go to therapy tonight. I'm getting less people looking at me like, oh, as I would have in the past. So I do think that it's something that I saw on my end is kind of improving, but also I'm like the interest I see of people to listen to this show also showed me like, okay, maybe they all don't think I'm a psychopath. Maybe people are listening because they're like, shit, I feel the damn same way.
Mhm.
So that's awesome. So obviously this year's a dumpster fire. We were just saying like a hot ass mess. But it's also an election year, and that is coming up. I think we're at like 25 days, 24 days until the election. So this is kind of a loaded question here. We see what's happening in the White House. We see our president's Twitter account. We Things are just out of control. Do you think that consistent evaluation of the mental health of elected government officials and leaders should be a thing? Like, should there be like a regulated type of mental health check-in that's required of mental health, or not mental health, sorry, elected officials and leaders of their mental health? Like, should we be checking in on that?
So I think to a point it makes sense. I mean, the president and other I'm not sure actually with other people in office, but at least the president we know gets a physical fitness
Sure.
examination from a doctor. So I think knowing if someone is mentally capable, mentally fit to serve could be important to know. When it comes to things like dementia, I mean, both of the presidential candidates are a little bit older, probably the oldest, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
77
approaching.
and 74. Like,
Mhm.
yeah.
So, that would be something that's good to know. I wonder, if we did that, what would be the criteria to
Mm,
exclude people from office? So, and how might, if we look at things other than just cognitive ability,
sure.
we look at mental health disorders like depression, anxiety, PTSD, things like that. And I would wonder how might that cause stigma to mental health if we did exclude based on those types of things.
Mm,
But I think a
oh,
general cognitive screener, I think that's important, probably more than the one that was given to.
yeah, probably a little bit more. Looking at this question, also, maybe we just need to vote for better people. Like, I just think it comes down to that, and less of we need to prove that they're, mentally unstable, or add, like you said, add stigma to, their mental disorders. Cause I think you could still be a good president and have mental disorders that if you're functioning and getting that help you need, I think maybe the assistance you need, maybe if you need a medication, I think you
Mhm,
can still function, and we don't maybe want to add that stigma that just because this person doesn't want to seek the help that we think they might need, that anyone that has that disorder can't function normally. So, huh. I'm thinking about. Now you made me think for a second. I was like, oh, because when I read this question, I'm like, hell yeah! If they got this, like kick them out. And I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, that's actually cool. I'm gonna note that. Okay.
Well, it's interesting too because there are certain mental health conditions that can be quite helpful in various arenas. So there was a really famous soccer goalie who had Tourette's,
Mm.
and he had really fast reflexes because of his Tourette's, where normally you might think, oh, if someone has a tic disorder, that's going to be a negative as an athlete. But for him, when he had to focus, and he was a US soccer player, when he had to focus in, his tics went away and he was able to have those faster reflexes as goalie. So, there could
Wow.
be some positive things.
That is amazing. That is okay. I'm okay. I'm into it. Changing my own. Listen, I'm here to grow too. So I'm like sitting here like, okay, let me take this all in. So we're talking about the White House. We're talking about the election. We already, everyone's mental health is we're all a little freaked out. Like you said, uncertainty. We're moving into November. Things are a little crazy. There have been some big discussions that occurred over the summer. You mentioned George Floyd. There's a large discussion right now about defunding the police. It's been a huge conversation on the table this year. I'm just wondering, obviously, we have racism, we have implicit bias uh, that come into play when we discuss police brutality and the issues that have been happening. I'm wondering how much of a role do we think that mental health plays when it comes to what we're seeing with the behavior of these police officers, um, and the attitudes around them, and just with this whole discussion about police.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think how I would like to see things done is I think all police precincts should have a mental health therapist on staff,
Mm,
for evaluation. In the military, you take an intelligence exam. In the military, you have military psychologists. And within the context of police, I mean, police, all first responders, EMTs, firefighters, police, all see pretty traumatic things during
hmm
the day. So, not only for that evaluative piece, but for their own mental health and coping with seeing some of the things that they do. But I think that having that access to some mental health provider could also do implicit bias trainings, be thinking about, you
mm,
know, re-examining, okay, how did this scenario happen? What was it about this person that you found to be threatening? And then trying to use the cognitive reframing. So shifting our perspective on things to say, okay, but would you have felt the same way about a person who is a different color, their skin color?
mm,
So I think
mm.
that having the evaluation, having the ongoing training would be helpful in the context of officers.
Sure. And to even go a little bit further, people were saying like when it comes to 911 calls, maybe they should go, depending on what the emergency is, perhaps there should be like a counselor or like a social worker that is the first to respond. I wonder,
Absolutely.
so that's something you agree with?
I agree with that, absolutely. I
Okay.
mean, you see the case of the 13-year-old boy with autism who was
Yes.
shot. Even in Miami, there was a case probably about a year or 2 ago where there was the man with autism, and then his counselor actually was on the street with him, and his counselor got shot
Is
because the man was having an episode, if you will. So, I definitely think that there are calls where a social worker, a psychologist, someone with mental health background should be the first person to go. And
yeah,
maybe a police officer could be in the car as backup in case,
sure.
but
Sure.
typically, mental health providers know about de-escalation tactics, that a lot of times police officers aren't aware of.
Yeah, I was going to say the de-escalation seems to be a big issue. How we go from 0 to 100, and maybe the mental health professionals stepping in there could kind of be that bridge and maybe save some lives, save the police officers some PTSD possibly from seeing so much shooting and shooting people, because I'm sure you can't, I mean, if you're not a monster, you can't really sleep well knowing that you just shoot people every time you're getting scared or flustered.
Right,
So I think
right.
for everybody that's a win. Yeah, I remember that case in Miami. It was his caretaker was black,
Mm,
and he was the first to get shot. And he's like, I literally had his hands in the air, like I'm helping him.
right, on the
Yeah,
ground.
on the ground, literally. But that's we already know that's a larger conversation that I think is yeah.
I think we're on the same page on that one.
We're same page, same page.
The thing
Now,
too, I just wanna briefly say
of
about that is
course,
that, we know that there is still stigma, rightfully so, between communities of color and the mental health field. And so, in thinking
Yes.
about adding mental health to those types of calls, we also need to be mindful of, do the communities that we're sending mental health providers to see them as allies? And how
Mm,
can we make sure that those mental health professionals are trained to also not be biased? Because everybody has biases, and I have biases, and I do diversity and inclusion training.
yeah.
So for my hospital. So, not just saying any mental health counselor will do to send out to these types of calls, but really someone who is practiced in understanding their bias and trying to fight against it.
Oof, that is something. That's another thing I didn't even consider. I was like, yeah, send them out, and then I'm like, wait a minute, because that's a very, very. That's actually something that's coming up on my list here about the stigma, mental health stigmas within the communities of color, especially. Um, that's coming. So I'm actually going to put a bookmark in that because now I'm like, oof. I kind of like where we're going here, bridging that conversation with the conversation about the police. So I'm gonna get back to that. I have one next question. We're moving into, I want to just talk about things people are experiencing day to day right now. Then we're going to go that route. In regards to COVID-19, today we're seeing everything from, we got anti-maskers, we have the shut-in hypochondriacs, which, I mean, are you even a hypochondriac when there's a pandemic, or are you just really just being careful? You've got people on extreme ends. You've got, our larger, some of our more, you know progressive states and cities, maybe, yeah, you might call them, that are being overly cautious. And then you do have places like, where I'm going to go ahead and say it because I'm from there, you have Florida. So I'm just curious, how do we think how much of a role do we think that mental health plays in the way Americans specifically are regarding and or responding to COVID-19 pandemic? Because I'm looking at some people like, are they crazy, or like, what? Whoa, what? What's going on?
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around it, right? I think there are so many factors involved in this that are all clashing at the same time. For
Mm,
one, we as an American society, as compared to some of the other societies that are doing a lot better than us, we are a very independent society, an independent worldview versus an interdependent worldview. So other countries look at themselves, the individuals look at themselves in the context of their relationships, in the context of others. America, it's like, YOLO, I'm going to live my life. Generations you see, F you, mom,
literally.
I'm going to move away from my family. I'm going to start my Insta. I'm going to get famous that way. So, we have this whole country of very independent people that don't feel like they should be inconvenienced by others. We mix that with, people have different willingnesses to take risks. Some people are risk takers, some people are not risk takers. So the people who are more willing to go out or more willing to skydive, I might argue, might be more willing to go out during a pandemic. The people that are like,
Yes.
no, 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 never, might be more willing to stay in. And then on top of that, you have to think about what we call distress tolerance. So,
Mm,
how much distress can someone take and use their coping skills to manage?
got
And
it.
having to manage a pandemic, a global health crisis for a long time, is testing all of our distress tolerance.
Mm,
Like we were talking about earlier, a lot of our typical coping skills we don't have access to. We can't see our friends and family if, like, the gyms have been closed. We can't go
mm-hmm.
do activities we enjoy. So all of
Mm-hmm.
those coping skills we have been using, we haven't been able to do. And at some point, if our distress tolerance is lower, we just can't handle not being able to do those things. So it's easier to just say, well, it's not a problem because
Yeah.
I can't, it's not a
Yeah.
problem anymore because this is the amount that I can tolerate.
Fair.
And so I think that mix of the distress tolerance, the risk, the independent sort of worldview is all playing together. And there are some people on different spectrums for all of those things. And so that's where we have anti-maskers versus shut-in hypochondriacs.
Okay, okay. See, I just be learning stuff. I'm over here like, okay. And I'm kind of actually starting to kind of look at some people who I do see taking more risks with a bit more compassion, because I'm like, okay, distress tolerance, like, based on your personality, your experiences, it's all different for everybody. It's very relative. Oh, interesting. Now, piggybacking off that, there
Mhm.
are conspiracy theorists, and conspiracy theorists are popping out of every little, every hole all over, everywhere right now, whether it's about COVID, whether it's about the mask, whether it's about Wayfair, Save Our Children. There's just yeah, I just am sitting here, Antifa, like there's just people that have these thoughts of this. What is that? Why are people so? Why do our country seems to be so desperate to cling on to? I figured out why blah blah blah, blah x y x x y x y. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it comes back to that uncertainty. We're very
Mm,
uncomfortable as humans with uncertainty. And so figuring out, even if it's the most off the wall, incomprehensible reason why something's happening, we'd rather have that reason than to be left questioning.
that's
And
fair.
so, and I think some people just like being investigators and trying to put together pieces on their own.
Oh my god.
There's something a little bit fun to it, but there's a sense also of, I think conspiracy theories really feed into people's fear.
Mm,
And fear is an emotion that we've seen dominate the election cycle and the rhetoric
yes.
around that, because fear is such a powerful emotion. Fear is probably one of the most powerful emotions.
Mm.
You've probably heard of the fight or flight response
Y-
before.
yes,
And
and
so
yes, for anyone who doesn't know that, maybe we can.
yeah, we'll go in. So the fight or flight response is basically when we are experiencing a threat, our body activates. So all of these different systems turn on in order to protect us from that threat. So our heart starts pounding, we start getting sweaty, our thoughts are sort of jumbled all over the place. And so when we experience fear or anger, this can also go off for, but fear, that fight or flight response is going off. And so all of our systems are turned on and we act in sort of survival mode
Fair.
when fear is activated. And so logic is turned off when we have enough
Mm.
fear. And so if people can use our fears to make us do anything it takes to survive, including latch on to things that maybe aren't true.
Yeah. This makes sense. Because I'm not going to say that every concept I'm reading on Facebook is a conspiracy and is a lie. Like I'm not saying, save the children. All of that is a conspiracy. But sometimes you see the avenues people will take with those concepts, and then they're like, "That's why Beyonce wore a red dress in 2017 because it was to signal off this person who caused this." And then that's why. And I'm like, wait. And it's people that I'm seeing do this that I just really consider to be, you know, solid-minded people, and I'm reading stuff and I'm like, girl, like what happened to you? But I think everyone is operating in fight or flight um survival mode. And like you're saying, their threshold for how long they could really live in that mindset is being stretched to push to the limit. So maybe they're like, I'm gonna come up with a million reasons why I don't need to wear a mask, even though I know logically no, but it's helping me because I'm gonna otherwise just fucking crack.
Yeah, and for some people too, I think they're having an anxiety response to wearing the mask when people are
Mm,
saying I can't breathe, because there are people who have asthma, who have other
yeah,
medical disorders that lead the mask wearing to be uncomfortable or difficult to breathe. But also
yeah.
I think there's a lot of mask wearing anxiety because we can't get in as much oxygen as we think, but it's because we're breathing differently wearing the mask. It's not because the mask is impacting our CO2 levels or anything.
Because they've done those tests.
They've done those tests. And doctors, surgeons wear masks for 8-hour surgeries.
And they
They're
don't fall on
fine.
the floor.
Right. I mean, they don't kill people accidentally because they pass out wearing the mask, you know?
Correct. And that I watched this woman. She was during when the Karen movement was really at its height, and she made this whole video about how she's like, I can't breathe with this thing. And then she started describing what she was going through, right? And I literally was yelling at my phone. I'm like, that is a freaking anxiety attack. She's like, my hands get sweaty. I feel lightheaded. And I'm like, girl, you were literally just describing you're having a panic attack. You're having anxiety from wearing this because it is different and
Right.
it's weird. But I'm like, girl, you're not dying.
Right. We've actually had protocols that have come out within my hospital for how to help people wear masks, because like that process of just getting used to it. Again,
Yeah.
it's, people are used to walking at a certain pace. And now if they walk at that pace, there's a little bit of restriction, of airflow. But if you just slow down,
You'll be okay.
it'll be okay. It'll be fine.
And see, and you know what? This is a very like not graphic, but low key kind of graphic comparison. But I wonder if when men started wearing condoms during sex, if there wasn't a very similar outcry of people being like, it's killing me, it's cutting off the, it's doing this to me, it's doing this to me because it's uncomfortable.
I don't like it.
I don't like this. You know, maybe we just need to do more to the women because this is killing me. I mean, I feel like I still hear that from men. So,
Well, that was the same thing when they tried to give men birth control. There were
oh,
side effects and
God
they didn't want to
forbid.
do it. So now the women just deal with all the side effects, but that's another story.
And when I started to hear the side effects that women go through with um, the contraceptives that women use, like one of my friends was telling me about getting her, I think it's IUD put in.
Mhm.
I've had two give me the same account where like literally they fainted from the pain or started vomiting from the pain of getting it installed and it fell out. And I'm like, men, what? We have nothing to complain about.
Installed is a great word
Yeah, I'm
to
like,
use
well,
for it.
let's call it the
It's
thing a
like at Home
thing.
Depot.
The installation kit is not what they say it is. I'm like, your what fell out? She's like, yeah, I think my blah, blah, blah just fell out. And I'm like, excuse me? And now they have to go reach back in you. And I'm like, okay, I think some people just really can't deal with discomfort. It's not they can't deal, they don't want to deal with discomfort.
Yep.
So now thinking about like, okay, men didn't want to wear don't want to wear condoms really reminds me about people that don't want to wear masks because they're freaking out because it's just uncomfortable. Okay. Interesting parallel. Now I'm gonna be thinking about that all night. Like, ah, interesting. Speaking
There's
of
a comedy
COVID,
skit there.
oh, it is waiting for somebody like Tiffany Haddish. Better not listen to this because I guarantee she's gonna go there. Or what's her name? Amy Problematic. The other, what's her name? The problematic Amy. What's her name? I think
Schumer?
she's funny. Yeah, Schumer. She's a little problematic though, which we all are. But Amy's. Ugh. I digress. Heavy. Back onto COVID real quick. Do you think, you said it has changed the landscape of mental health community, as in, people are 3 times more likely to be dealing with depression.
Mhm.
Do you think do you think it's going to change the way change mental health in America, like for good? Like, do you think this is going to make a permanent mark in the mental health community in America, COVID-19?
I absolutely do. I mean, we think about our grandparents' era with the Depression, and you can tell that someone grew up in the Depression era based on the way that their behavior has changed.
Mm.
My grandma, every time at Christmas, she takes off the wrapping paper. She doesn't rip that wrapping paper. She's like, I'm going to fold this up and I'm going to save it, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Or you better eat everything on your plate because back in their time, having food was scarce.
True.
So I think that this will have some permanent impacts on us after we open up I'm curious, when are people going to be comfortable getting close again? Are we going to have sort of residual hypervigilance about being around others? But this pandemic, like we talked about, is asking a lot of people. Some people don't have jobs. Some people are taking on multiple jobs while working and teaching their own kids at home and trying to do
Jesus.
Zoom lessons. Like,
Oof.
bless all the parents out there because this is
Literally
rough.
shout out because me trying to set up this podcast for tonight on here, I was like, Nana, like, what am I doing? Now, if there was like a 5-year-old yelling at me, I would, no
Yeah,
way,
throwing jello around,
no
it would
way,
be.
no way. Just, nope, I'd just run away.
I
I
mean, we're
just,
spending more time with our roommates and partners than ever. I mean, there's a
yes.
reason that everybody's buying plants, right? We're all trying to figure. I
I've
have
been
20
buying
new
plants.
plants.
I've
I
been
have
buying
20 new plants.
plants.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
think I have 4 real plants. All my plants are fake, but I got real ones.
see you upgraded.
There's just something about keeping something alive. I'm like, let me just get into this real quick. Something alive in here
Mhm.
that doesn't speak.
Yes, yes.
Great. And
You're
doesn't run
also
around and shit on like a dog or a cat. I just
preparing your apocalypse bunker by having fresh oxygen.
well, that part too. I'm not gonna lie, low key, high key. I'm still apocalypse bunkering in the back of my mind. So okay, we definitely think COVID's gonna change America, and it already has changed America in a big way when it comes to mental health. Now we
Oh, can
touched
I say one
the
more thing
yeah,
on that
of
quickly?
course, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think that this is a chronic stressor that none of us in our lifetime has ever experienced, and so it's testing our central nervous systems. It's testing our coping skills, and it'll be interesting to see what some of the long term impacts are, like hormonally for people. But the
Oh,
positive, because long term stress and race based stress is long term stress, and so we see some that we actually could probably look at the Black community to see how stress impacts the body to give us clues about how COVID might impact us. But
oh,
also, mental health is more accessible now because of
Hmm.
COVID, because everything's telehealth.
Ah,
So in some ways, it's easier to get connected with a provider. The only thing is making sure you have a private, safe space to talk to your provider from home.
that is something I hadn't really considered. I mean, I've thought about obviously things are remotely, a lot, or you're doing things remote right now. You can go on and video chat with your therapist. However, that is making a lot more accessible to people.
Mhm.
Um, I have a friend who was trying to find a therapist of color specifically, and it was so hard for her to find it regionally because of where she
Mm.
lives in Florida. But with COVID, I mean, those possibilities are endless because now every therapist is working through video chat, whereas before some only did in office, I believe,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
for new
I mean,
patients.
yeah, doing video was very rare for therapy private practice therapists prior to this. It's like nobody did it solely for not nobody, but most people did not do it solely
Yeah.
video. So, but now I know a lot of therapists are like, do I have to keep paying rent on my private practice? Because I could just do this
like
from my
uh,
house.
like it's working from my living room.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, my
From
therapist
my
works from
bed with
home.
my bowl behind me, you know?
But my bull, I have a big bull behind my head, guys. It's massive. I named him Earl today. It just happened. My therapist, we video chat, and his cat will periodically, like at least towards the end, the cat will just walk by the camera, and then he's just like. He'll just pets her now. Like he doesn't even like pay it any mind. I see her. I'm like, she knows my secrets. We're good. It's fine.
Yeah, she won't say anything.
She's keeping my secrets. So okay, so there
She's
might
judging though,
Oh, a
the
thousand
cat.
percent.
Yeah,
Cats judge every. I'm not a cat person.
neither.
The whole mystery machine of what's going on in their head. Are they going to claw me? Are they going to just cuddle? I don't got time for it. You had enough of that when I was trying to date, and like, I don't need to deal with that with actual an animal who I have to pay for their food and their rent. Like, no. Mm-mm. Now, so what we're saying. Okay, sorry to wrap this, put a bow on this conversation about COVID really quick. There are some actual positives to the way that it has impacted the mental health community. It hasn't just been like all bad. I mean,
Right, right.
if
There's some
anything,
accessibility improvements for sure.
if there were some therapists that were just like, man, I don't have any patience, I'm bored. I bet they're probably like, oh well, I'm booked. I'm booked this year. Um, now we talked a little bit about police. Um, and the community, the relationship between police and the Black community, and about stigma when it comes to bringing in like mental health care providers or social workers to help de-escalate some situations and calls that police are receiving. Now, I want to ask, um, demographically, where do you notice the most disparities when it comes to mental health accessibility, the actual people, maybe they have access but them actually utilizing it, and when it comes to stigma, um, how did I word this, what was I thinking, the difference between like stigma versus lack of access, in which communities are you seeing that to be more of like a situation, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. I just that question, I was like all over the place.
No, you're good. You're good.
You smell what I'm stepping and you know where I'm
I
going.
do. I do.
Okay,
So
preach.
there's a lot of evidence that people like to go to therapists who they feel like can relate to their experience. So part of the lack of access issue, then the stigma issue, I think, comes from the fact that our therapist population is not very diverse
Mm.
racially, even sometimes finding a therapist if English is not your first language. So a Spanish speaking therapist can be a challenge depending on where you live,
Oh wow.
or even a Mandarin speaking therapist, depending on where you are. So some of it has to do with the pipeline issue. And how
Mm.
do we destigmatize all the way down the line so that we get Black people, so that we get Latino people, so that we get Asian people um, to be interested in caring for mental health and treating other people who can connect with their experience. So I think that's part of it. Do you have a
Wow.
question? Yeah.
No, I'm just sitting here like I didn't even thought about the whole trying to find someone who speaks the language that you're most comfortable in, your native, language. If English is your second, but like to dig deep into your trauma and have these open discussions, maybe you need to go back to your original language to
Mhm.
speak that. And woof, I didn't thought about that.
Yeah, emotion is most powerfully expressed in your first language.
Wow.
So even someone who learned Spanish in undergraduate, graduate school might not have all of the emotion words to fully treat someone, but obviously only treat people that we're competent to treat.
Sure.
But it's important to consider that accessibility of language as well. Um, but I think that, for communities of color, as sort of alluded to before, there's stigma around mental health. There seems to be, less stigma around going to a religious figure, for example, to talk. And we know that that stigma exists because certain communities have been mistreated by the medical community, mistreated by the mental health community in the past. And so it's not surprising. Um, I think that if you can say a positive, if there is a positive coming out of George Floyd's death and I should say the awareness of George Floyd's death, is that the need for mental health support for Black individuals has increased. And so you have great organizations that are getting Black therapists together and forming networks so that people can access that. Providing free services for individuals of color to try to reduce the accessibility issue and try to reduce the stigma issue. Myself, I have gone into and spoken to AME churches just to talk about PTSD and other things, just to give education, break down barriers, and show that mental health doesn't have to be this scary place. It doesn't have to be a place that should be mistrusted, but just trying to, make people see that it could be helpful.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I would like to believe that whoever people do believe in that's their higher power would want them to, in addition to, their religious um, traditions, but they would also want them to seek someone to help them with their thoughts and with what's happening right now. So I do think that there doesn't need to be um, one or the other. I think some people think of it as if I'm going to a therapist and maybe I'm acting like I don't need church or I don't need the Bible anymore,
Mhm.
and they kind of feel guilty about that. So that is awesome that you have gone and had those chats, because that's where I was sitting here, and I want to talk about Black people for a second, because we are literally. I was talking to someone, a white friend of mine, and I was like, it's really annoying sometimes when I go to watch a presidential debate and I'm actually a fucking topic on it. Like I'm like, you don't have that moment, where they're like, how can you get white people to trust you? Like, how can you make it? I'm like, I hate being a topic of
Mhm.
discussion amongst two elderly white men that are talking as if like we are. It's tough because they really, most of the time, the presidential candidates do their best to try to speak to us, but sometimes it feels like we're sitting in a room and they're talking about us, and I'm like, there's a level of you know strain when it comes to your mental health from being the subject of these conversations.
Mhm.
And I'm just sitting here like, okay, what are some survival tips for Black people keeping our head on our shoulders right now, keeping it from rolling down the freaking hallway? Because I personally, being a Black man, told someone I was scared about wearing masks, and it had nothing to do with my breathing. I said I was out of my neighborhood, which was predominantly white, and I was walking by a white woman on the sidewalk, an older white woman, and I'm so used to using my smile as a way to disarm people.
Mm.
And I realized the mask took that away from me. And I was like terrified. I'm like, oh my God, what if I get mistaken for someone else? What if I can't disarm them with a smile to make them feel like I'm not going to mug them? What do I do? And I had like weeks of trying to grapple with that. Like, I'm freaked out for a whole different reason than other people are freaked out when they go
Right,
out with
right.
this mask on. So I'm just wondering, to my POC out there, because Black, brown people, I mean, Asian, my Chinese friends right now, I mean, our president is screaming the China virus every chance he gets. Like, I am making, Chinese people like almost the villain in
Right.
this pandemic. We're going through, what can people of color that are going through this, and even we'll move through to white allies as well, but people of color specifically, from a mental health standpoint, what are some tips, some survival, how are we going to get through this?
That's a great question. And I think that that mask concern, that's so powerful because people are not thinking about that who don't have to, right? I mean, that's their privilege to not worry about, oh, I can't disarm someone with a smile. I hope they don't shoot me in my bag of Skittles.
Literally.
Um, so yeah, that's really powerful. I'm glad that you shared that. Um, I think the first thing is just mindfulness.
Mm.
Mindfulness is so key to all of this. And by mindfulness, I mean checking in with yourself. We have access to information all the time. We have debates that are going on that we can't escape because they're on every single channel. We have social media. We have, you know, just unlimited access to information, which is overwhelming.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so checking in with yourself, seeing what you have the mental and emotional space for. If you don't have time, for example, we will talked about not being able to watch the George Floyd video. If you don't
Yes.
have the space to watch that video, you never have to watch that video. If you don't have the space, the mental space to read about the latest Black body that was taken unreasonably, unfairly, unjustly, don't read it. You
Yeah.
know, you can identify friends, allies who can relay information to you as needed
That's fair.
and just try to take what I call an information diet. So,
Ooh, information diet. I love that.
so only checking the news, like a reputable news source once a day
Got it.
and trying to,
Yeah.
hide those pages on Facebook that keep popping up that are just,
Yes.
your crazy aunt who's
Literally.
spouting stuff all the time,
Yes.
Beyonce's red dress, you know, um,
Literally. Yes.
mute those people as possible.
Mm.
Also, just trying to connect with your community, leaning on them. There are lots of resources that are coming out specifically for the Black community to heal. I know here in Philly, there's a group called Black Men Heal that provides free therapy. There's the Oshun Family
Wow.
Center that's doing free trauma focused therapy for Black individuals. There's also a great app called Liberate Meditation, which is a
Okay.
meditation app that's for BIPOC. And there are some free meditations, some paid ones, and it's made for BIPOC by BIPOC.
You know what? I think my therapist, that's the one my therapist sent me.
Okay. Yeah,
My
see,
therapist sent me, oh,
they
it's like one of
know.
those things where it's like, okay, my therapist told me, and I'm like, yeah, I'll get to it. But then someone else tells me, I'm like, oh, well, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
100%. Okay. So mindfulness, I was telling, in addition to what you said, information diet, I think is going to be huge for us, but also not feeling the obligation to have discussions with people who don't agree that our lives matter, and
Right.
not being allowing people to gaslight us and being feeling like it's our responsibility because we're Black, like I have to have this conversation to help enlighten this person, but it's
Right.
like you don't.
You don't have to educate, you don't have to enlighten this person. You can, actually our mutual friend volunteered to step in for me to have a conversation about Breonna Taylor with a former white colleague of mine who was sort of challenging some of the things going on.
Yeah.
And our mutual friend said, you know what, I'm going to step in, I'm going to take this, I'm going to do this for you. There's also an interesting Instagram website called My Karen Translator.
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
And
whoa.
basically, people can submit questions or experiences
What?
they've had with Karens. And it's two white ladies who are taking the time to translate for Karens.
No.
So you could always go in there as a
Whoa.
person
What?
and just say, "Oh, okay, Karen."
My
Okay,
Karen translator.
my Karen translator. Yeah,
And this is on Instagram.
on Instagram. Hmm.
That is being an ally if I've ever seen it.
Hmm.
Wow. That's like next level allyship. Like I'm
Yeah,
gonna dedicate a whole page to helping translate this shit.
exactly.
Wow. Okay,
It's great.
Guys, please go on that. Please, I'm
My
going like
Karen
I'm
translator.
trying. If I didn't have my notes open on my phone, I would be on there right now because I could already think of some things. Wow. Yeah, I love that because I was just saying, I've had some friendship issues and some friendships that just didn't make it across the finish line this summer because I was talking to a friend about it, a white friend of mine who I adore. I was talking to him the other weekend, and he was just saying, kind of like not saying what you should have done, but being like, I love how you communicated this to me. He's like, I wonder how things would have gone differently if you were able to communicate that to them. And I said to him, I'm like, you're not fighting me. So I can have this discussion with you. I'm like, I could not have it with someone who's going to push back because I don't have the bandwidth. Black people, we're tired. I'm
Yeah,
sure people of every color that are dealing with shit like in 2020, we're just tired. So you
yeah.
don't have to have those conversations.
Yeah,
Got
you
it.
don't have to have those conversations. You can say, you know what, I'm not in the space to do that right now.
I love information diet. I love that. Oof. So, okay, we are kind of moving through these questions here. I feel like I want to go to my listeners' questions as well. And then I kind of want to close on a discussion around how people can gain access, maybe some different resources or some suggestions for people. I had some questions on here, just kind of like speaking in general, who should seek mental health assistance, but we've already discussed everybody could use it in a different way, short term, long term, to get them over a
Mhm.
hump, a situation, a breakup, a new job, what have you. So I want to move
Absolutely.
into my listeners' questions because I don't want you guys to be stuck listening. Even though this conversation, I mean, I don't know if y'all are enjoying it, but I'm like obsessed. I don't even care. I'm sitting here like, oh my god, I
The
love
best.
this. I'm like, I'm not. I don't get enough. I can't get enough of this. I see a therapist. I'm taking a cognitive behavioral therapy practitioner course. It's like you get a little certificate. I'm taking a certificate
Nice.
course. I want to learn a bit more about how my brain works and then kind of structure those conversations around what I bring to my therapist. And he's able to break it down because he knows me.
Mhm.
So, yes, I can't get enough of this. But I want to talk about my listeners' questions because I got a few. Okay. Our mutual friend actually asked, how can you avoid the 2020 blues? And I'm wondering if we've kind of covered that a little bit. I think for everyone, information diet is important, but how do you, with being quarantined and with the things that we're experiencing with the isolation factor, what are a couple tips that maybe you would suggest for someone to kind of avoid those blues?
Yeah. So we are all tapped out, like we talked about. There's a great article that came out on the Medium about surge capacity. You should be able to just Google that, but it really just normalizes the fact that we are all exhausted from going through this pandemic. So, trying to combat the blues, I think there are three key things that you can be thinking about. One is to sort your day, try to schedule your day, and try to meet three goals in your day. One is to do something that fits your value of achievement, something that is meaningful to you, that if you get it done, you feel good. It could be cleaning your house,
Mm,
it could be exercising, it could be um, doing something for work. The second thing is do something that touches a value of closeness or connection. So have a text or phone conversation with friends or family, do something in your community, do a cleanup. And then the last thing is do something for your pleasure.
hmm.
So reading, a nice bath, watering all the new plants that you just got in quarantine,
Yeah, keeping please
doing
keep them
something,
alive.
yeah, keeping them alive, something creative, and just doing those three things each day. Really, like that's sort of the key
Mm,
to get a little bit of balance with your
sure.
wellness and your well-being. And so I think even if we can just check off one thing in each of those columns a day, that can be helpful for combating some of these quarantine blues and give us a little more sense of control because none of us have as much control as we used to have right now.
Correct.
So even if we just do those three things and
I love
however we
that.
want to define those things, achievement, connection, pleasure, one of each day.
I love that. Um, okay. Next question kind of falls back to what we were discussing a little bit earlier. What are some tips to dealing with friend breakups? Because I think people are really experiencing that when, in the words of, what's her name, Cindy Lauper, I see your true colors.
Yes.
We're starting to see people's true colors because we're down to the wire and we're talking survival mode and Black lives and all of that. So, what are some tips for people that are going through a friendship breakup?
That's tough. That's hard. And I think seeing those true colors is can be very, very painful because we are wired to invest in our relationships and
Hmm.
to be connected to people. So first for that person, I'm so sorry that you're going through a friend breakup. And for everyone who's going through friend breakups, it's sad. So with loss, it's just really important to know that you can feel your feelings. You can feel sad, you can feel angry, you can feel hurt, all of it. Cry it out if you need to, journal. Sometimes it can be helpful to write a letter to them, saying everything you want to say. You don't have to send it to them ever. You could like burn it and do a little dance around it. I
I like that.
personally have written a letter and then burned it to while listening to Todrick's Yas song,
Ooh,
You
ooh,
Ain't Shit.
okay.
And it just there's a video of it. It's really funny. I burned it in my sage bowl, and it just helped me to just say everything I need to say and then put that behind me. So
Closure.
closure, yeah. And sometimes you don't
Ooh,
get that closure with people, um, so that can be something. Get that closure, but also, if this is someone that was a significant part of your life, you spend a lot of time talking to them, texting them, spending time with them. There's going to be a hole there And
Yeah.
so once you've moved through your emotions about it, not gotten over them, not
Yeah.
gonna get over them, but once you've moved through your emotions, seeing what other things you can use to substitute and fill that time. Could
Hmm.
be a new hobby, it could be fostering another friendship or investing more in the friendships that have been more reciprocal for you. But
Sure.
that empty space
Yeah.
doesn't feel pleasant, so just finding something to use that empty space to fulfill. That's a value of yours that makes you feel fulfilled.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, I like that. I'm actually taking those notes for myself because I've personally gone through a few this summer, and I'm like, okay, this is
Todrick
good.
Hall, he
This is
fixes
good.
everything.
Okay, I'm gonna have to play. Me and Todrick, we have our issues, but I have to play that song. I have another one here. I have a listener who said, "Why do parents seem to always forget our traumatic experiences or try to downplay them?"
Great question. So
Right?
it's interesting because I have nieces, and sometimes they get upset about things where the first instinct of my adult brain is like, why are you upset by this? Why does it bother you so much?
Yeah.
But what I've started to do is take a step back and look at it from their perspective. So, in the mind of a 3-year old, 6-year old, 13-year old, those are my nieces, their life is a blink of an eye compared to mine. The struggles they're going through, the thing they're so upset about, the trauma that they're facing is the biggest thing that they have ever gone through. And even
Got
though
it.
it might be minuscule to me, it is so important in their life.
Got it.
So I think sometimes we get wrapped up in our interpretation of people's problems relative to our problems rather than relative to their own
Mm,
experiences and their own coping skills. So it's
mm,
possible that that lack of perspective taking is why some parents are forgetting or downplaying traumatic experiences.
wow. That makes sense. That
It's
makes
interesting.
sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting too, because if the parent is the one perpetrating the traumatic experience,
Hmm.
just like your high school bully probably doesn't remember the time they stuffed your head in a toilet, if
Yes.
something bad is happening to us, it gets ingrained in our memory forever.
Yeah.
But the person who's doing that, if that is not causing a big emotional reaction for them, it's probably just another thing they did that day. So it might be that the event wasn't significant enough, as hurtful as that is to us,
Yeah. Yeah.
to experience it, but not significant enough to that parental figure for it to register as important to keep in our memory.
Sure. That makes sense because I'm actually personally dealing with um, finally addressing a lot of like childhood trauma. And
Mhm.
I'm starting to see, like, maybe they did not see their actions as being, that serious or that, impactful because to them, they had a million adult things going on through their head and parental things. And they were just like, do this action, keep it moving. Whereas to us, you're saying it's the biggest thing that we experienced at that time when we were 12, 13, 14, 15.
Right. Right. And
Oh,
the trauma, remembering that trauma, remembering again, trauma often goes hand in hand with helplessness, hopelessness, fear. Remember, we were talking
mhm.
about fear before.
Yeah,
Fear is something that's going to set off a light bulb in our brain because we don't ever want to be in that situation again.
correct.
So, compared to other emotions, fear is like what keeps us safe.
Yeah.
So, it's going to be a very poignant memory for us. Where
Mm,
again, if they did not feel fear in that moment, it's like,
yeah,
whatever, you know?
true. Okay. That actually makes sense because people, a lot of people were and are afraid of their parents. You don't want to get spanked. You don't want to get, whatever disciplinary actions they would take. And
Hmm.
so if you were feeling terrified, it's going to really leave a bigger imprint than it would for them
Yeah.
if
I
to them
do
it was
hope
just another
though.
Tuesday.
Yeah, I do hope though that, as we get older, as we find our language, which again, our generation, I think, is getting a lot better at using language around mental health and around feelings,
Yeah.
that once we get a better understanding of how that impacted us, if we feel it's safe to do so, sharing what that was like with our parents. This was an event that really impacted me. I think about it a lot. And I just wanted you to know, not like needing anything from
Yeah.
them, but just making them aware.
Fair. Now, what's funny is now that you've said that, it actually leads me to the next question, which is one that someone wrote in. And it says here, I have a 26-year-old sister who can be very ignorant and offensive. Whenever she says or does something that is tone deaf, she instantly plays the victim when you hold her accountable.
Mm.
Example, She texted me this week to ask me if I thought the man she is currently talking to might be gay, simply by simply looking at a picture of him. She sent via text. She said she figured her brother would know, and when I told her that was an ignorant assumption, she lost it and started calling me arrogant and selfish. My question is there a specific way to check her when she is straight up wrong that won't end in a childish argument? Should I just tell her to seek therapy and leave it at that? I love my sister, but I refuse to ignore her wrongdoings just because she interprets accountability as an attack. And I'm wondering if this really does go hand in hand with, let's say, you bring up a situation where someone did hurt you, and they're a type of person that instantly goes into defense mode,
Mhm.
or like he said, victim mode. How would you suggest he kind of navigate figuring that out?
Yeah. It can be difficult because people don't like to look at themselves in the mirror when they've done something that is harmful. Generally, humans don't like to harm other humans or be wrong or be shamed. I mean, shame is an emotion that kept us in line with society's rules. If
Hmm.
you did something that was shameful, then you got kicked out of the, caveman group back
Got
in the
it.
day. So people don't like to be like, ooh, shown that. So my best recommendation would be see if you can use this formula when giving feedback. We call it I statements. So think about when you got that text, how it made you feel. Really take a little bit of time to identify how it made you feel. I felt confused. I felt, you know, disarmed. I felt insulted, whatever it is. I felt the emotion when this happened. I felt confused when you sent me this text about your boyfriend because why would you assume that I can tell if someone's gay by a picture?
Sure.
So rather than saying, why are you sending me this? Why would you do this? Because and you might have already done this, listener, so I apologize if you have. Um, but when we turn it on ourselves, when we say, I feel something, people can't tell you how you feel.
True.
Where if we say, that was wrong of you to send me that and ask me that, why would you say that? They're
Mm,
instantly going to get defensive. They're instantly going to be on their heels. If we explain how we felt because of the action and then the key components, so I felt confused because you sent me this picture. Next time, can you ask someone else? Because I don't feel
fair.
comfortable making this decision. So give them an out, give them something that they can do instead to
Fair.
prevent that from happening again.
Fair.
Does that make sense? Sort of like
No, that does make sense. And I think,
shifting the way that we approach it.
yeah, and maybe she will kind of come to the conclusion that maybe what she asked was ignorant without you telling her that it was ignorant. But based on the response
Right.
she gets from you, maybe it would be like, oh, the fact that he was just like, okay, no, I would rather not have that conversation. Like, maybe it was a dumb question. And maybe she'll start to figure that on her own as opposed to you literally telling her right out the gate, hey, that was ignorant.
Right, right, right,
Shut the fuck up. Even though you
right.
want to, and
Even though you
right,
want to.
and sometimes rightfully so, but I get that.
Yeah, but if we want to keep the line of communication open,
Sure.
them getting defensive does not do that. So taking a step back and thinking, what is my ultimate goal with this? If I want to have a conversation with them and about why they did this,
Mhm.
using that I statement can get you in the door to have that conversation.
Sure. That's awesome. I have another question, and this is something that I know several people are dealing with. I deal with it sometime. Help. My insomnia is driving me crazy. Any tips? And I know mine has gotten worse since COVID. Since the pandemic days, I just barely sleep. So I feel you,
Yes.
listener.
Yes, yes. Insomnia, I think I don't have the exact numbers, but I know that insomnia has increased a lot during COVID too, because we're doing everything in the same space, which is
Mm,
not normal. One of the first things that we talk about when we do sleep treatment is saving your bedroom for sleep and sex only. But now
mm.
we're doing podcasts from our bedroom. Now we're doing
Oops.
work from our bed. Not calling anyone out.
Yeah.
And now we're doing work from our bed. Now we're having Zoom meetings. We're watching Netflix marathons into the night.
Hmm.
So we are using a space that used to be sort of a single use space for
Mm,
everything.
got it.
So one key thing I would say, if you have a smartphone, there's an app. It's called the CBTI Coach. It's a free app and it has all these different tools and skills you can use. It's cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia coach.
Oh. Oh,
So
wow.
it has a sleep log that you can track your sleep. Basically, in the morning, you put in what time you went to bed, how long it took you to fall asleep. It'll crank out your sleep efficiency, which is the ratio between how much time you were in bed and how much time you were actually sleeping.
Oh, wow.
So that's super helpful. And that's sort of the basis of the treatment of CBTI that you can see a sleep professional for, a sleep
That's
psychologist
amazing.
for. They have getting a regular sleep schedule is helpful. Really anchoring your sleep, waking up at the same time every day is the most important thing for getting a regular sleep schedule. It's not what
Mm.
time you go to bed, it's what time you wake up.
Oh,
No, it's
okay.
weird. It's weird. And it's because throughout the day, we build up a sleep debt. So, all the activity we're doing, the work, the walks, the exercise, the watering our plants, trying to keep them alive, that's accruing a sleep debt throughout the day.
Sure.
So, the earlier we wake up, the earlier we start to build up that debt. And then we get tired when that debt's
Sure.
high enough, as long as we
Got
don't
it.
take a nap.
The naps will ruin it
So,
all.
yeah, then absolutely earn it all. So if you can be consistent about when you wake up and starting to build up that sleep debt, you will eventually get to the point where you're sleepy at night. Um, but
Oh,
if
I'm
it's
downloading
important,
that app. Oh, I want
yeah,
that app.
definitely do it. CBTI coach. It's great. If you have a lot of anxiety before bed, I'd recommend doing some meditation, shutting off the news, shutting off social media at least like an hour before bedtime because we know there's nothing good on there. So
Nothing.
don't do it.
Nothing good.
Don't do it. Listen to some smooth jazz or whatever music you like, the birds chirping, whatever is calming
Ocean
for you.
sounds. I listen
Ocean
to ocean sounds.
sounds,
Yeah.
yes. The rhythmic waves,
Ah.
because also I was thinking about this because this is my problem is that I like go on Facebook right before bed,
Mm.
and it's really hard to go from looking at people's posts and being like, "You gonna learn today,"
Yes.
to restful sleep, right?
1,000%. Oof.
So trying to just
Oof. It's the
wean off of
worst.
that.
It's the worst. It is the worst. And I'm so I what I've done to try and help myself not go on apps at certain times is I delete the icon off my phone.
Smart.
And then on the way to work, I'll be like, okay, let me download this out of my cloud. But it does help. Now, sometimes I'm smarter than myself, and I'll just be like, bitch, I'm just downloading it now because I'm bored, and I look and I'm like, did you really just defeat the whole purpose of why we did this? So it's tough. But I
It is tough.
love that idea, and I definitely want to download that app. We've
Yeah,
got
it's a great app.
one more question, and this is the big one that I know a lot of people. I know people who are experiencing this. Um, what are some suggestions for people who hate their jobs but can't quit right away due to COVID? These are not the times for people to be job hopping. I mean, depending on your field, maybe it is a time to make leaps. But I think speaking in general, people
Mhm.
might not feel as comfortable, job hunting during a pandemic if they don't have to. So, what
Right.
are some suggestions for people trying to just make it through a job that they're just not enjoying, um, but they feel stuck right now?
Yeah, that's tough. And I have been in a job that I hated. It's awful. I totally get it. Um, so you're probably already thinking about other moves you can make, getting your resume ready, all of those things. Do going back to those three wellness goals that I talked about before: the achievement, the connection, the pleasure. Seeing if you can do a little bit of that every day is important. See, is there anything that you like about your job? This is a little bit of that CBT that you were talking about
Sure,
earlier,
sure.
Anthony. So is there we can start to overgeneralize. And I'm not saying that your job isn't awful. I'm just saying that um so I'm not minimizing that your job sucks. Just saying that sometimes we can start to discount the positives
Got it.
because the negatives are so overwhelming. So even if all you have is to hold on to that one coworker who you laugh with, or that one aspect of your job that you kind of sort of don't hate or like, that can be helpful for getting you over this hump.
Sure.
Also, really just investing the time that you're not in your job doing things that you absolutely love and that you
Mm,
find value in. So, we often are the happiest when we are doing things that are of value to us as a person. And we all have different values. Some of us value being of service to others. Some of
sure.
us value connection. Some of us value justice. All those marchers, justice, big
Sure.
value.
Yeah.
So figuring out what are those values that are the most important to you and investing your time in doing things consistent with those values outside of work, because that can
Mm,
help basically fill up your cup.
sure.
for work draining your cup, it sounds like.
Yeah, makes sense. That totally makes sense. Um, wow. I just want to say, even before we go to get ready to wrap this episode up, how valuable this information and this perspective and insight that you've been giving has been. So thank you so freaking much for
You're
taking the time out
welcome.
of your busy schedule, doing all the things that you do and all the hats that you wear, and doing this as a profession to like work with people and just taking time to. Because I'm sure. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe you don't. I don't know, maybe you enjoy having these conversations outside of work, but I always thought like, God, a therapist when they clock out, that's the last thing they're going to want to talk about. But so
This is fun.
thank you. Okay, good, 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 good. It's like, okay, no, but thank you so much. And I want to close by you. If there's only one takeaway people would have from this episode, which is complete bullshit because they're going to have a million because it's just been like Wisdom Fest 2020. But what would be a one takeaway for people right now? If you was just one thing you could leave them with, one little nugget.
So my nugget would be curious about yourself. Be
Mm,
curious about your life, why you do the things you do. Maybe they work for you, maybe they don't work for you, but as we've slowed down with COVID, this is a time where you can really explore. And if you find something where you're like, "Whoa, that's hurtful or that's ugly or just why?" Ask for support. You know,
oh,
there are tons of resources out there.
that is amazing, and you've actually given us a lot of great resources throughout this whole episode. Were there any more that you want to throw out this way before you head out?
Sure. So there's a great website called NAMI, NAMI. It's the National Alliance for Mental Illness. It's a great resource, the steps to get connected with care. Your primary care doctor might also have references. I work in a primary care office and help people get connected that way. And also, if you're looking for mental health resources, Psychology Today has a directory, therapy for Black girls, therapy for Black men. So there are tons and tons of resources. Just the biggest thing, if you do want to get connected with care, is know what you're looking for,
Mm,
what you're looking to work on. Is it relationships? Is it changing your thoughts? Is it grief? Is it sex therapy? Any number of things. So you really want to find someone who can specializes in what you want assistance with.
sure,
So know what it is that you're looking for before you start looking for a therapist. And if you don't know, maybe, if you are someone who, for example, is in the LGBTQ community, you can find therapists who work specifically with that community. And if you need
sure,
help figuring out what exactly you want to do, but just need someone who understands your experience, you can also find therapists who specialize in your particular community.
sure. When I went to find my therapist, I was all up on his website, and then I saw like LGBTQ. I saw people from uh, he works with different races of people and marginalized communities. Then I saw religious trauma, and I was like, oh my god, it's like looking at like the perfect Tinder account here. It's like, oh my god, swipe.
Swipe right.
Yes, I'm swiping right on this. So yeah, there you can actually, in most cases, you can really read what their specialties are to kind of.
Hmm.
And it's like I say it's like a date, it's like if you don't like them, you don't give up on love necessarily. Just go out on another date. You're not
Exactly.
committed. If you know
Exactly.
they're shitty, like in one or two sessions, you're like, oh, this guy's trash, or I'm uncomfortable by this person. Then I
Mhm.
mean, don't give up.
Exactly. And sometimes it can be helpful to look at a group practice
Ooh,
because if you go to a group practice, you say you pick a therapist and then you're like, oh, I don't know if this person clicks. Oftentimes, a group practice won't make you do the whole interview, that initial evaluation with a new person. You can easily just transfer within the practice. So it can be
ah,
helpful to, if you're not quite sure what you're looking for, a group
sure.
practice often has a lot of different options of people you could work with.
Oh my god, that's great news. Also, one last question off the books here. Will you come back on the show? Will you do this again? Can we do this
Yes.
again? Oh
Oh
my
my
god.
gosh.
Oh my
Yes.
god. I'm so excited. I can't wait to play this back again and then like listen to these nuggets again when I'm like not trying to record and make sure like the audio is not like completely effed up. So, thank you so much for being on my show. Guys, I want to thank you for tuning into the show. You know where to find the Instagram page at Depressed Funny People. Yeah, Depressed Funny People. Make sure you're following. You can get information about new shows and some memes in between. Also, make sure you are subscribed on iTunes. You can also subscribe on Spotify. And if you're on the iTunes, you can shoot me a rating or a comment. You can also slide in the DMs and just send your questions or concerns or comments, or if you something helped, let me know. I'd love to feature it on the show. You can also send me audio clips, which you can do through the bio in iTunes, or even on Spotify too, if you have questions that are 1 minute long, or comments, or just a shout out. So thank you for tuning in, guys. And until next time, bye.